With the college basketball season coming to an end, not necessarily coming to an end, but March is coming up. What does Rodney Terry need to do to keep his job at the University of Texas going into next season? Yes, we discuss on today's episode of Locked On Longhorn.
You are Locked On Longhorns, your daily podcast on the Texas Longhorns. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Longhorns, the show. Jonathan Davis, your host. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. So on today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, once again, we discuss Rodney Terry, what he needs to do to continue to be the University of Texas head coach going into next season. In the second segment, the discussion of 9 SEC games rather than 8 has come up again. We discuss all the implications and details of that. How would you feel about the Longhorns adding an SEC game to their schedule? And then in the last segment, it seems, right, we have to say this because of this Tashard Choice situation. It seems that Texas is keeping their strength and conditioning coach, Coach Beck, on the 40 acres. And so we discussed that. All of that and more on today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So Rodney Terry was always a polarizing hire amongst Longhorn fans, right? Because we know that, coming off of Shaka Smart and just, Rick Barnes, like this program has always had good players, has always been able to put players in the NBA, but this program has never been a championship level program. And that's kind of been the expectation for Texas, right? Let me not say that. It's never been a championship level program in the past. And so, Texas fans have been, like just hoping for the day that we could get a coach that could get us over the hump. As good as Rick Barnes was, he wasn't able to do it. Shaka Smart, he wasn't able to do it. But then you get Chris Beard, right? And there's a ton of hope amongst the fan base. And I remember we beat Gonzaga, right? And, Chris Beard was obviously coming from Texas Tech, one of the best coaches in college basketball. And so you thought that he was going to be the one to be able to get you over the hump. The program just felt different, right? It felt like it was going to have that championship pedigree. If he could take Texas Tech to the national championship game, imagine what he could do with the resources at Texas, right? And then the recruiting, the team they had, being able to go out and get 5 stars, like they did in Dylan Mitchell and Arterio Morris, as well as all those players out of the portal. Like I said, they had that huge win, against Gonzaga to start off the second season. Things looked really good for Chris Beard at the University of Texas until they didn't, right? And obviously he had the domestic violence situation that ended up, leading to his dismissal from the University of Texas. And Rodney Terry, the top assistant on his staff, takes over. And ultimately, Rodney Terry takes that team to a Big 12 tournament championship and the Elite Eight. And so then the question became, do you give Rodney Terry the job or do you go find somebody else? And that's where kind of the polarization came in because, you had a lot of people looking at it like Rodney Terry deserves this job, right? Maybe from an emotional standpoint, but a lot of people were saying Rodney Terry deserves this job. He took over in a tough situation, led this team to a Big 12 tournament championship, led this team to the Elite Eight. What else does he need to do to prove that he can coach this program? And a lot of people said on the other side, that was Chris Beard's team. As good as a run they went on, that was Chris Beard's team. If you look at Rodney Terry prior to, what he did at the University of Texas that first year, he was essentially a 500 coach. And you can't make an emotional decision and make him the head basketball coach of a program like Texas when he was largely just steering the ship that Chris Beard ultimately had to be taken off of, right? And I was kind of one of those people that was like, he's proven that he can coach this program based on what he had to do, after he took over for Chris Beard. But the last 2 years haven't been as glamorous, right, since that Elite Eight run. Last year, they didn't make it to the second weekend, didn't make it to the Sweet 16. Now, a lot of that had to do with Dylan Dessou and Max Aisman's, basically forgetting how to shoot the basketball. Once they got to the tournament, they very well could have beat Tennessee and got to the second weekend. But, you go from an Elite Eight performance to not even getting to the Sweet 16. right? Which is a big deal in college basketball. And then this year, you bring in a bona fide NBA player in Trey Johnson. You bring in some other really good transfers, and you think that this team can compete at a high level. Even moving to the SEC, you feel like this team can compete at a high level. And they have dealt with some injuries, but it just has not been a great season for the Texas basketball team, even coming off of a top 15 win against Kentucky in the Moody Center. And so, CDC hasn't said anything. This is not any intel I'm getting from administration or anything like that. But you do have to wonder if now is the time to reassess and take a look at, is Rodney Terry the best coach for this program moving forward? Because what we've kind of seen over the last 2 years is Rodney Terry may be a good coach, but he may not be a great coach. And with the SEC being as strong as ever as it is in basketball, you need somebody that can put the University of Texas in championship discussions, especially when you look across the hall and you see what Vic Schaefer is doing with that women's team. You need somebody at the helm for this Texas men's basketball team that can put them in championship discussions. And based on what we've seen last year and now this year, where Texas is in danger of not making the tournament at all, you have to question if Rodney Terry is still the guy, right? And so when you look at Texas and what they've been able to do this year, right, they are sitting at 16-10. Let me see what their conference record is. Hold on. I know they have a losing record in conference. You know what I'm saying? I'm not finding it as fast as I want to. But I know that they have a losing record in conference. Now, the SEC has been by far the strongest conference in college basketball this season. So, that is not going to hurt them too much, in terms of when you're talking about their resume to get into the tournament. But you would have liked to see them have some bigger wins. They did have the 22-point comeback against Texas A&M. Like I said, they did have did beat the number 15 team against Kentucky. But outside of that, every other team that you thought maybe they could punch up and beat, or teams that were on their level, they've lost those games, right? They beat Missouri, but you lose to Arkansas, Ole Miss, Vanderbilt. Couldn't punch up and beat Florida, couldn't punch up and beat Auburn, couldn't punch up and beat Tennessee. You lost to Alabama by 20, so this is a Texas team that's just looked lifeless, even with the injuries for a lot of the year. And so now you look at it, I think right now, currently, after their win against Kentucky, they're projected to be a 10th seed. So it does look like, if they can kind of stay the course and get hot and get some momentum through their next 5 games and in the tournament, then they will make it. The SEC tournament, they will make the NCAA tournament. But I'm not sure making the tournament is enough to keep Rodney Terry's job. So when you look at their next 5 games, they play against South Carolina, Arkansas, Georgia, Mississippi State, and Oklahoma, right? You have the capability outside of Mississippi State you could beat all 5 teams. What I'm saying is Mississippi State is the only team that's currently above you right now in the SEC rankings. So, Texas should be able to go 4-1, right, in these games, 3-2 at the worst. Win a couple of games in the SEC tournament, maybe win one, and you should be in the NCAA tournament. But is that enough for Rodney Terry to keep his job? Is that enough for CDC and the administration to say, we're good with this for another year? Or would it be time to say, we need to go get us that guy? Like, we appreciate what Rodney Terry has done for the program over the last couple of years, but we need to go find that guy, and we need to do it right now. And I think for Rodney Terry to keep his job for another year at the University of Texas, this team has to find a way to get to the Sweet 16 or beyond. For Rodney Terry to keep his job, this team has to find a way to get to the Sweet 16 or beyond. If they do not, then I think the administration is going to make that tough decision that they need to go get that guy. Because like I said, since the Elite 8 run, I love Rodney Terry to death, but I'm not sure he's proven that he can be that guy at the University of Texas. And like I said, when you look across the hall and you have that guy in Vic Schaefer, it puts a lot more pressure on Rodney Terry to get the job done. Now, the last 2 seasons, I'm not sure that's what he's done, right? Quick word from our sponsors, and then we talk about potential changes to SEC schedules and the college football playoffs coming up in the next couple of seasons. All right, today's episode of Locked On Longhorns brought to you by TurboTax. This is a message from sponsor Intuit TurboTax. Taxes was dealing with piles of paperwork and frustrating forms and then waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any money back. Now, Taxes is easily uploading your forms to a TurboTax expert who's matched to your unique tax situation, an expert who's backed by the latest technology, which cross-checks millions of data points for 100% accuracy. While they work on your taxes, you get real-time updates on their progress, and you get the most money back guaranteed, all while you go about your day. No stressing, no worrying, no waiting. Now, this is Taxes Intuit TurboTax. So get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live Full Service, real-time updates only in the iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. All right, so some potential changes coming to maybe Texas schedule and the college football playoffs as a whole. So let's kind of discuss them individually at first and then how they may affect each other long term. So the first thing is the 9-game SEC schedule, right? And this is something that's been in the circulation for a while now. The SEC is still the only major conference that has 8 conference games rather than 9. And this is something that was voted on before Texas and Oklahoma came into the season. Came into the SEC this past season, and they decided to stick with 9, right? But we always knew it was something that they decided to stick with 8. I'm sorry, but they always knew that it was something that they would revisit, right? But I guess the crux of it was, the SEC coaches and administrators are already saying, well, we played the toughest schedules already. Going through the SEC is an absolute dogfight every year. Why would we add another conference game to that just to make it even harder for our teams to be in a position to win the national championship, especially when we're already getting, kind of that respect with playing 8 games? Adding a 9th is only going to make it harder for SEC teams to be there in the end, right? Because that's just another opportunity for losses. And then for another conference whose schedule is not as strong to say, okay, their strength of schedule is whatever. You're looking at this Indiana team that has 1 loss and Alabama has 3, right? How do you weigh a 1-loss Indiana team versus like a 3-loss Alabama team, et cetera, et cetera? That's just an example, but that's ultimately what happened this year. And that would be more of a conversation if you had a 9-game SEC schedule. And then I know when you look at it from a fan standpoint, especially the way that Texas schedules their, non-conference games, Texas fans are like, why would we add another SEC game? Hell, Texas fans are like, why are we even scheduling Ohio State and Michigan? You know what I'm saying? Like, why don't we go play Wake Forest or somebody? You know what I'm saying? Like, because you do have to play a power, 4-team, core 4-team out of conference. So you can't just schedule, UTSA, UTEP, North Texas, and, whoever else. But yeah, Texas fans are like, why are we scheduling Ohio State and Michigan? You know what I'm saying? Like, so I know that most Texas fans wouldn't be in favor of adding a 9th conference game because, yeah, when you look at it, that's just another opportunity for you to go out and lose potentially a tough game. And that game could be the difference between you making the SEC championship. That game could be the difference between you making and missing the 12-team playoff, right? And so on the surface, it certainly looks like adding a 9th conference game, although it would provide a lot more money, another good game on the schedule and things like that, is only creating a tougher road for Texas to ultimately achieve their goals of being conference champions and national champions. But here's the caveat to that. And I've always been in favor of the 9 conference games, but for me, it's just about competition. Like, if Texas is who we think they are, then adding a 9th conference game shouldn't be anything but a boost to their schedule, right? A strength of schedule, right? Like, if Texas is one of the best teams in the SEC, put whoever you want on the schedule and we'll go out and prove it. That's how I felt. So I always argue, I don't never want to back into the SEC championship or back into the playoffs. But, of course, I'm just one person. But here's the caveat to adding an extra SEC game. It seems like that would be in response to or on the brink of the college football playoff expanding. And there's been talking about the Big Ten and the SEC, right? Because now out of the core 4, when you include the ACC and the Big 12 to that, the SEC and the Big 10 are clearly the two power conferences right now in college football. Like, those are the creme de la creme, the cream of the crop right now, the Big 10 and the SEC. Now, of course, the Big 12 and ACC fans, might scoff at that, but that's just kind of clearly the reality, right? When you look at all the best teams in college football this year, Texas, Georgia, Oregon, Penn State, Ohio State, who won the national championship, what conference did they come from, right? So if you were to add or increase the college football playoff, which seems like it's inevitable in the next couple of years, to 14 or 16 teams, and then the Big 10 and the SEC would get 4 automatic qualifiers, would that change your perspective about Texas and every SEC team adding an extra conference game? If you knew for a fact that the college football playoff was going to include 4 SEC teams, no matter what, the top 4 SEC teams were going to get a spot no matter what, would that change your thought process on Texas adding another conference game? And I think that's the discussion, is that if the SEC is going to get 4 automatic spots in the college football playoffs, if the college football playoff is going to expand to 14 or 16 teams, it's going to have to be done with the SEC finally moving to the 9 conference game slate. But like I said, you kind of have that protection because, yes, you're adding an extra conference game, but you're also getting 4 automatic qualifiers into the playoffs. And based on what Steve Sarkisian has built at the University of Texas, do you see a scenario in the near future in which Texas would not be a top 4 team in the SEC? It might not happen every year, right? There may be some years where things happen, injuries happen. You may have a down year. But how often do you think in the near future Texas would not be a top 4 team in the SEC, even if you added another conference game? And so, I'm in favor of it. It seems like the change to the college football playoff format is inevitable. I do think that the Big 10 and the SEC, getting 4 automatic qualifiers may be kind of like a slap in the face to the Big 12 and the ACC, but ultimately they're bringing you the best competition. They're bringing you the most money, and, they're bringing you the best teams. So, there's kind of nothing the ACC and the Big 12 can do about it, right? And life ain't always fair, right? The fair is where you ride rides and get, corn dogs and funnel cakes. But yeah, I think that if the playoffs were going to move to, 14 or 16 teams, and the SEC would move to a 9 conference game slate, even with the way that Texas schedule is out of conference, going against the big dogs like Ohio State, Michigan, Alabama before they were in the SEC, I would still be in favor of that, because at the end of the day, it's about fan experience. And I know a lot of fans are saying, I don't care who we play. I just want to get into the playoffs. I want to compete for championships. Cool. But we see how we respond to games like Michigan, games like Georgia. You know what I'm saying? And then we see how we respond to games like Mississippi State. You know what I'm saying? Like, at the end of the day, it's all about fan experience. And I think increasing the teams in the playoffs, increasing the number of conference games that Texas plays is only going to benefit us, the fans. And I believe that based on what Steve Sarkisian has built, this Texas program will be good enough to overcome their schedule becoming, in air quotes, tougher, right? Quick word from the sponsors. And speaking of tough, somebody who's added a lot of toughness to this program over the last 3 years, 4 years, Torrey Becton. And it looks like he's going to continue to do that at the University of Texas. We discuss after the break. All right. So like I said, we've already been scarred once by the Tashard Choice situation. So, we're going to knock on wood. I don't want to knock on wood too hard because my mic is kind of on its last leg. But, keep our fingers crossed that, somebody doesn't come in like, the Cowboys or somebody, in the next week or so and just offered, Coach Becton something that he just can't turn down, right? A deal that he just can't turn down. But it looks like he's staying at the University of Texas. And I think that, strength and conditioning has been a huge plus for this program, since 2021, since he came in. And it's clear the impact that he's had at the University of Texas, right? Like, just as a program, we remember in those games in 2021 and before, it just felt like we couldn't compete, especially sometimes in those close games in the second half. It felt like Texas was worn down, but it felt like Texas was small. Texas couldn't win the physicality matchup. It just didn't feel like a program like Texas should feel. Like when you watch Georgia, when you watch Alabama, when you watch Ohio State, Michigan, teams like that, like you feel the physicality. They feel bigger than their opponent. They feel faster, stronger, better than their opponent. And it didn't feel like Texas was able to impose their will previously like a program like the University of Texas should. And now we're starting to see that. And I believe a lot of that is attributed to what Coach Beck has been able to do with our players, right? So from a team standpoint, this Texas team over the last 4 years has just looked bigger, stronger, faster, and have been able to assert their will over inferior teams like we're not used to seeing over the last 10 years, right? But also from an individual player standpoint, so many of these guys have come in from high school looking wet behind the ears, you know, looking frail, looking small, you know what I'm saying? Like, and I wouldn't say that, but just looking completely different after they get on campus, right? There's guys that, I mean, Colin Simmons, you're talking about one of the greatest high school, players of all time in the state of Texas. He was on campus for like 2 months and gained like 10 to 15 pounds, right? So, what this program has been able to do for our players has really contributed to the success on the field. Our strength and conditioning, this team looks equipped physically to go up against anybody in the country. And that's not something you could have said about this program 4 years ago. So all the respect in the world to Coach Beck and what he's done with the strength and conditioning program. He has really transformed the way that we play at the University of Texas, not with the X's and O's, but how we are built physically every time we line up against an opponent. And it's good to see him that he's been here since Sark has been here, and he'll continue to be here with Steve Sarkisian because, we talked about people like Tashard Choice being invaluable to the staff, even though he was just a running backs coach. Like me and you could probably go out there and tell the running backs what to do. You know what I'm saying? Like it's, you know what I mean? Like it's running back. It's no simple position in football, but it's like he was so much larger than that. He brought so much more to the game than that. It's like Coach Beck, you know what I mean? It's just somebody that you can't afford to lose because you just feel like he's irreplaceable. Based on the results you've seen with this football team over the last few years, it's hard to believe that somebody will be able to come in and just do what Coach Beck does. He's absolutely special. He's absolutely essential to the staff. And it means the world that he's going to continue to stay with this Texas Longhorns football team. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Hook 'em. Peace.